Alrighty. So thank you for joining us for the student panel, our former student panel interview session, where we're going to hear firsthand from some of our students who are products and have experienced the E2a Learning Model. So if you would like to add any, thoughts to your idea pad, feel free to use the idea pad from the keynote. You don't have to make an additional copy. You can just add to the one that you already have. So I'm going to go ahead and introduce myself. My name is Ashley Guadarrama. I work directly with our CEO, Shannon Burke. Prior to being Shannon's assistant, I was an 8th and 9th grade algebra instructor in Harlingen CISD. So I did implement the E2a Learning Model there for 3 years. And then I came on board with E2L as a certified eGrow coach. So I did that for another year. Then I was an assistant principal in South Austin for 2 years, and now I am back with E2L this year as Shannon's assistant. So I work really closely with her, help out with a lot of the planning, organization, and supporting her in all things that we do. And I'm going to go ahead and let Dr. Chris Everett introduce himself.
Hi everyone, my name's Chris. I'm a systems transformation strategist. You get to know us long enough, we make up our own titles, so that's mine, but it's essentially organizational strategy. Systems level leadership, both in the internal Engage to Learn organization, but also supporting school district partners in that at that level of planning and systems work. And I've been an educator for 20 plus at just about every level of the school system except for the superintendency. And I've been with Engage to Learn for 4 years and just a couple of weeks.
Thanks, Chris. So as we go through the session, Chris will actually be monitoring the chat. So as we get into our norms, if you have any questions that come up or you have questions that you'd like to ask the students, we're going to try to save some time at the end to answer some of those. So please put them in the chat. And then Chris will be able to compile those at the end. And then if you'd like to see the student, the students that are the former students that are on the panel, you can do the gallery view so that you can see them when they are speaking. And like I said, you have your idea pad to jot down any thoughts that you might have throughout the session. So our focus today is to really gauge the panelists' experience on how they developed in their life ready skills with this implementation of the E2a Learning Model. And so you're going to hear directly from them and their experience. And so ideally the outcome that you'd want is to, one, from hearing their experience, to then see how does this learning model ensure the growth in the life ready skills that students are needing to succeed once they leave the 4 walls of the classroom and then obviously move into the real world. So I've provided a link there for you that you can access any of our resources for the E2a Learning Model. Shannon did a session earlier on learner agency where she touched base on the context behind the E2a Learning Model. And so all of our sessions, we're recording and we'll be able to provide you with, after the fact. But if you joined her session, then you'll have a bit more context. But essentially, we're sharing out and we're providing you with the E2a Learning Model that has been the foundation for E2L from when we first started. And this is the learning model that we've coached many teachers on, districts, and now a lot of districts have moved into their own framework, but we do still have a lot of districts that are adopting our model. And so you'll be able to hear from the students that worked with this particular model. So if you have any other questions in regards to the model itself, feel free to visit our website. I do want to add that this experience that the students will share can transfer both remotely and or in person. And we spoke to those pieces as well in the interview that we just finished up with Mitzi. So if you were in that one, you were able to kind of hear about that. But ideally, moving into any of the 4 possible futures, we want to ensure that we're putting something into place that is transferable regardless of what that future is that that we might face. So some of the life ready skills that the students will be speaking to are those that we're coaching our teachers on when we're coaching, in the best practices and coaching them around rolling out either the learning model and or their frameworks. And so you'll see those on screen, and you'll also hear, in what the students are sharing, that they've developed and grown in a lot of these skills, which has ultimately prepared them for where they're at today. So I'm going to go ahead and share with you who is on our panel. And so panelists, if you can kind of just wave and, and say who you are so that everyone can see you on screen. We have Erin Castillo with us, and the first few students that you're going to see here actually were at the Harlingen School of Health Professions in Harlingen CISD. They've graduated since then, since I was with them. But we do have Erin. So Erin, if you want to wave. He's out there, and he's at Brown University currently. Matthew Garcia, we also have him on the panel.
Hi, how are you doing?
There's Matthew, he's at Harvard. He might have to leave us a little early. He's in between class and work, and he's got a lot going on over there. So thank you for joining us, Matthew, and giving us some of your time. We also have Miss Jackie Magno with us. There's Jackie, she's at the University of Texas at Austin. And then we also have Mr. Marco Martinez. You want to wave, Marco? He's at Texas Tech University. And so all four of those students were at the Harlingen School of Health Professions. And now I'm going to introduce our next set of students who also implemented the E2a Learning Model from Round Rock Early College High School. So we have two groups of students with us today. So we have Miss Estrella Sanchez. She's at Texas State University. We also have Lily, and forgive me if I say this incorrectly, Xiang, is that correct? There we go. And then we have Darshni. Awesome, so thank you for joining us, ladies. So we're gonna go ahead and I'm gonna stop screen sharing because I want you to actually be able to hear and see the students. So we'll go ahead and get started with our first sets of questions here. So I know Matthew and Estrella, you wanted to share on this particular topic. So, and I forgot to mention, I'm sorry, y'all, the interview questions are also available on your idea pad. So if you wanted to access them and see them as I'm going through them, they are available on the resource link that's in the session catalog. So feel free to look through those. And once again, if you have any questions that come up, please put them in the chat as Chris will be monitoring. So we're gonna go ahead and get started. So Matthew and Estrella, I know you wanted to share out your experience on this. What did you enjoy most about your experience with the E2a Learning Model, when it was an implementation at your campus?
Hi, so my name is Matthew. I do have to get to work, so I'm going to answer first, if that's okay, Estrella. One of the things that I most enjoyed about the E2L Learning Model was definitely the independence and autonomy that came out of the way that the whole system is structured. From speaking with many of my classmates who at school, who all around the world, have had so many different experiences in learning and different learning styles. I tell them about my experiences in Texas public schools, and they'll say that that's awfully restrictive. Students, ever since they're in a very young age, are constantly being told what to wear, what to politically affiliate with, what time to get to class, what extraordinarily strict TEKs they have to learn in class, etc. But I think the really interesting thing about the project-based learning and the E2L learning model is that it gives you the flexibility to take some of this restriction that we have constantly in class and strip it away so that really you can practice autonomy and independent thinking within the classroom. Instead of having the classroom, because students spend, 6 hours of the day in the classroom, and it's finally an experience to escape kind of the strict public school boundaries and really begin to use your creative mind for good. And this autonomy really, in my opinion, helps students form their own independent skills and creativity that leads into them not only seeing their academic coursework as something that they have to complete and take a test and pass some kind of end of the year exam, but really things that they can take into the real life world and use it as a system and a motivation for change. So for an example, some of the great skills that I learned through the E2a Learning Model were collaboration and research skills, which served me super well. Recently founded a nonprofit that is providing free private lessons to kids. And in that, the skills that I developed in learning to work with students through academic projects, designating leaders and setting norms, have all transferred extraordinarily well into the nonprofit space, into the research space in college. I'm affiliated with the Harvard Med School Lab. And I do have a short amount of time, but I have to say that I am a huge fan of this learning model. And I strongly believe that its ability to have students see learning and education not as a set of tasks, but as a way to grow personally and contribute that personal growth into the world is what makes it such an amazing learning system.
Thank you for sharing, Matthew. And I know if you have to pop off, feel free to do so, but thank you so much for joining us and for, giving your thoughts and your experience. Thank you.
Thank you for having me. I do have to go. Bye.
Bye, Matthew. Estrella, did you want to add to that?
Sure, a little bit. Definitely, I agree with Matthew. I feel the same way. And I feel like it benefited us a lot more since we were still in high school, we were still young, and we were developing skills we didn't know about back then. And we talked about this as a group, and I feel like it was something mutual that we all felt, that we didn't think we would have these skills by now. And the thing about the learning model is that it really pushes you to do a lot more. And that's where you gain more skills. That's where we weren't aware that we were getting those skills because, we were just in the moment, we were trying to get our work done and we were just doing our best. But really, we were meeting new people. We were, like how Matthew said, we were doing research, we were learning how to learn, we were learning how to study, and that really benefited us in the long run. And I feel personally for me, it really encouraged me, and in a way, it like benefited me more and be more confident in myself and my work, especially now that I'm in college. It really helps me be more confident.
Thank you for sharing, Estrella. I just want to add that when we kind of all met because these students didn't all know each other. And so we met so that they got to know one another before we did this panel. They did definitely have that consensus of not knowing that they were necessarily like developing and growing in those skills until they actually needed to implement them. And then they knew, well, I had already learned, I had already grown in these skills. So thank you. And then I think Estrella, you wanted to touch base on what, next, the transition to the E2a learning model. So from your previous experience before it and then transitioning to the learning model. So what was that like?
Yeah, so when I came to early college high school, we had this model, and coming from a middle school, it was very different from traditional learning. And at first it was a new school as well, as we were all shy. We were really just to ourselves. But with the E2L learning, we got to learn one another. And with that, like I said, it pushed for us to improve and get to meet new people. And that's something that at first it might seem intimidating for some people, but being in those groups, being in that model really pushes you and encourages you to talk to one another, and, gain that confidence in your own skills and also in the leadership role that you'd be taking in the group area that you'd be in. So that's something that it might be difficult at first, but as people get to know one another, we get more comfortable, and that's something that really motivates us at the end.
And I like that you share that because now that you're all in your respective universities, I mean, that's kind of like what it was when you first jumped into your first, lecture, your first, project, getting, having to know people that you didn't know before. And so thank you for sharing that because I'm glad that you were able to grow in those skills. So it made the transition, out of, the K through 12 classroom a lot easier for you. So we're going to move on to our next question. How was your experience with the E2a Learning Model different from the traditional learning environment? And so I think, Lily, you wanted to touch base on that.
Yes, hello, I'm Lily. So E2L was definitely, as Estrella said, it was a real transition going just from your average K to 12 model to E2L model. So I know that like my memories from just being in like a normal learning environment was just like you're in a lecture, the teacher doesn't know you, the students around you don't know you because you never talk to them and you're just basically having words thrown at you the whole time. But going into E2L, and Estrella did touch on this, it's like it pushes you like out of your comfort zone to get to meet the people around you and to be able to form better connections. I felt that I also became a lot closer to my teachers because they became like, this will go more into a different question, but they became less of like a traditional lecture teacher and more of like what a professor would be during office hours. They're your resource. They're there to provide you with extra support with your content as you're going through all of what you need to learn, all the material. And so you've become closer to your teachers and to your peers as well. You're able to bond a lot more than I feel like you would at a traditional experience. And also, it's a little bit different because the students themselves, they are the ones in charge of their own learning. It's not just it was what Matthew said, it's not just like the teacher gives you information, you're taking a test over what they said, you're done. It's more of a continual process with learning rather than just like grades and dead end kind of route, which I felt like traditional learning kind of goes more off of. So the students are more in charge of their own learning. They're more able, and like the other skills that you develop, you're able to actually get more out of what you're learning in class. So it was a transition, but it also had its differences that made you more developed as a learner and as a person as well.
Thank you for sharing, Lily. That's so powerful. And you know, I can't say it enough that I'm glad that you were able to develop in those skills, and now you're able to use them, you know, in your personal life, and obviously like at your university and the experiences that you're having there. So thank you for sharing. Our next question. So was there an instance where you needed, you know, to work remotely without the teacher's physical presence, and or let's say you were out of the classroom and you needed to continue, you know, with your instruction? And if so, what was your experience like? How did you continue moving forward?
Yes, there were definitely several times during high school where, you know, like the normal thing happens where a teacher's absent, they have a meeting, they're sick, not in class with us. Well, this is when E2L is really, you definitely see another side to it because it, as I said before, it does place more responsibility on the students to complete their work. One of the key components to project-based learning is that each student, they have a plan to complete their work. They started at the very beginning of their unit of like, hey, I'm gonna get through this teak, and this teak at this time, and I'm gonna do the work associated with it. Although it is self-paced, it does, again, bring you in charge of like, this is where I wanna be at this time before this other assignment. So you already kind of go into class just knowing your expectations and knowing where you yourself want to be at during that class. So instead of just relying on a teacher to feed you information and then just transfer it into a test, you're actually just like, okay, even if the teacher is not here, I know where I want to be at. I know what is expected of me and what I want to get done before this class ends. So it's really like, it is a lot more like a college class. Like you have to be responsible, and it does give you more responsibility as a student. But that again is one of the benefits that you don't realize it at that time, but you start realizing it later.
And I think Darshni, you also wanted to add to that piece about, you know, how you think that this could work. You know, if you were out of pocket or your teacher was out of pocket, and your thoughts on that and how this could transfer.
Oh, so basically related to how if we were like virtual or something?
Yeah, so if this were if you were ever to have to be out, I think Lily kind of mentioned like if the teacher was out of pocket or you're out of pocket, I think you had wanted to, you said that you wanted to add like how would you be able to continue moving forward even if, you know, you had to do things on your own or if the teacher wasn't present or you weren't present. And we're trying to make the connection to if if you were in that setting, right? Like what would that look like today for students that might be in this virtual setting? Because I know you all weren't, but how do you think that that could transfer to those students who might be in this remote setting moving forward?
Yeah, I think collaborating with your teammates and your and people in your group really help with that because they might be having the same problems or the same issues that you are, and so having like good connections with your teammates and stuff can help with that.
Awesome, thank you. So we're gonna go ahead and move on to the next question. And so Erin and Darshni, I'm gonna go ahead and direct this one towards you all. Were you always collaborating? You know, were there times where you had autonomy? What did that look like?
Yeah, so we were collaborating a lot, especially because we were in our groups mostly. And so like for like an example of like how we collaborated was like for me, Spanish is a hard subject for me. It's a beautiful language, but it's hard for me. And so definitely collaborating with teammates and stuff really helped with that because when we were going through the TEKS and stuff, as we get higher in the levels, it gets more difficult. And collaborating with your teammates and having people around you really helped with that because when we're doing our DIYs or like our in-class work, we we would ask our teammates and our group members like for help, and it really like helped in that aspect for me. Something more broad would be like a collaborating thing that we did with our teammates would mostly be for our norms and stuff or our roles. We would make sure, so norms are like rules that we make or create during the beginning of the unit. We would collaborate together to make sure that we all follow these roles and these set of norms that we created for each other so that we stay on task and stay working throughout like the class period and learn. Also, we would have roles at the beginning of the unit that we create for each other. So for example, one role would be like workshop manager. And so each of these roles and stuff would help make everything smooth and make sure that we all learn what we need to learn in our class and in our unit. So those are just some things that I've noticed when we're collaborating with teammates and stuff.
Thank you, Darshni. And Erin, if you would like to add on, you know, your experience with either collaboration and or how there was autonomy built in.
Yeah, I definitely agree with what Darshni said in terms of there being a lot of collaboration and, you know, being able to ask questions to teammates and kind of problem solve together. But I definitely think there was also a lot of moments of autonomy. You know, like Darshni said, you set roles at the very beginning. And so everyone has a specific duty that they kind of carry out throughout your project. And that really puts a lot of independence on the student to kind of carry out whatever task you're going to do and really problem solve and figure out, not only with yourself, but with others, what's the best way to kind of tackle that and how to figure out how you're going to best teach it to your teammates, because that's also a lot of what happens during the times is you'll learn content and then have to bring it back. And so it's not only learning how to understand it better yourself, but how to do that in a way that's understandable to the rest of your group so that everyone's kind of on the same page and that you're all moving forward together.
Thank you, Erin. So we're going to go ahead and move to our next question. And so what was your teacher's role when you were engaged in a challenge, in any given challenge? And was it similar to that of a traditional teacher? So what role did your teacher play? And Marco, if you could speak to that, please. You're on mute. There you go.
Sorry. So our teacher, with my experience, the teachers were kind of like there for guidance. So as it was explained earlier, you know, it's not a traditional classroom setting. So we're not there sitting in class getting lectured the entire time. You know, they're actually there helping us teach ourselves and our classmates. So what I mean by they were there like for guidance was, you know, we all had different roles. We all, and as Darshini said, there were different techniques that as they progressed, they'd get a little more difficult because we had to get out there and, you know, look up different problems, look up different, like, you know, we had to teach ourselves in a way. But if we ever met an obstacle where we were kind of confused or something, we would all communicate with each other. And then once we couldn't come up with an answer, or we were a little lost, we would then go to the teacher, and the teacher was like a mentor. So they would help us, you know, put us on the right path, or say, hey. So they were really there for guidance. Sorry, was my internet connection cutting out?
It was for a moment, but then it came back on. It was fine.
Okay. But yeah, I mean, you know, they were really there just to make sure that we weren't getting lost, because E2L is very collaborative among students. But of course, you know, the teacher's kind of there just to make sure that we're on the right path.
That's awesome. Does anybody else want to add to that?
Sure, yeah, I can add to that. Like Marcus said, the teachers did help us lead to the right path. And like an example or one way that they did that was like for our problems and stuff, they would ask questions instead of just plain out giving the answer to us, because that would help us understand that specific problem or challenge. But it also helps us learn more about that specific topic that we're learning about. So yeah, that's just something. But what Marcus said was like pretty good. So yeah.
That's awesome. I have a question. It's not on the list, but and if anybody else wants to put questions in the chat, I think I know that these students are very well equipped to answer off the cuff questions. So my question is to you guys is, there's gonna, you know, a lot of our educators that are on here learning from you are gonna be virtual, right, this fall. And I'm sure you all experienced this, right? Probably this spring, because I know my son who is at University of Texas was, you know, everything was virtual. And some, you know, professors did a good job and some did not do such a great job. So what is your advice? Does what you're describing, does that work in the remote setting? And how would you see it working? And what advice would you give to these educators as they're, you know, going into this, like, this is great, but does it work remotely? And how would it work remotely? So who wants to answer that? All right, yeah, Lily, go.
I think honestly, project-based learning will work a lot better than lecture on an online platform, like without a doubt in my mind. And there's several reasons to why I believe that. So number one, project-based learning, again, you're the student, you're driving your education. Like, you know, if you're in a college class, the professor's not going to come in and be like, hey, like turn in your assignment that you didn't do before. Like, they're not going to do that like they would in a normal environment. And so online is exactly the same thing, where it's just you can choose to do it because it's online. The professor's not going to come after you and tell you to turn in your stuff. And so as a student, you're in charge, you're responsible. And again, those skills that you develop, just like the anatomy, the independence in your own learning to complete your own stuff. Like I know for me right now, I'm going into a criminal justice class this fall that is entirely online, and I'm just like, I feel really prepared actually normally, besides how I would before whenever it first transferred online, because I just realized like I already kind of have all the skills that I would need to complete my stuff on my own without relying on a teacher lecturing me, without relying on a teacher who's just spoon feeding me all the information that I would need, because I'm able to take the information online. I'm able to apply it to all the assignments I need to get done in order to schedule, to prioritize, just to still get as much as I can out of my own education. And if you're an educator, I'm not an educator, but my advice would honestly just be to like have trust in your students, like be a resource to them, but know that like through project-based learning, they're able to develop everything they need in order to succeed, whether it's online or in-person classes, because they're developing those skills without realizing it, it's going to lead them through college, it's going to lead them through professional life, it's going to lead them through work. Right now I have an online externship and I'm entirely responsible for doing my part of it without anyone checking on me being like, hey, are you doing this? that was something I think I definitely got from E2L, both for the like 4 years I had it in person or whatever, and like the little segment of it being online and being like, hey, I can do this because I was already doing this and developing what I needed without realizing it at first. That's all I have to say.
That's so great. That's such a great answer. And, you know, that's what we're always trying to do is trick you into getting skills that you said, you know, like you didn't even know you needed it, but you got it anyway. But that's the whole goal, right? It's like you're like doing something and then you find out, oh, wow, I'm completely prepared. And I love your point. I think, you know, university level work, especially after what's happened this spring and what we're going into this fall, more and more of it's going to be online. And so being able to handle that well is going to be true college readiness going forward. I mean, there's going to be very few, I think, classes that are going to be able to be had in person. And so a lot more of it's going to shift that way, you know, besides, like you're saying, even virtual work later on, like your externship or even the work that you're in. So yeah, that's a great point. Actually, I just asked them the question about, you know, how do they see this transferring to the remote, and Lily shared. I don't know if anybody else wants to share, or you can redirect.
Thank you for doing that, because I got kicked out, so I'm back. And so it was a great segue into the next question. And so the next question, I think, Marco, you had some thoughts on this, and Jackie also, if you want to chime in, because we want to hear your voice. So what life skills did you build and like grow in while you were actively engaging? And so I know we spoke to the experiences that you have now, but if you can kind of be specific about like what are the skills that you actually feel now that you grew in that you didn't know, like Shannon said, we were tricking you into. So if you can share your experience on that.
Yeah, I can definitely start us off here. So one of the things that I learned from the E2a Learning Model, first and foremost, was self-discipline with my studies specifically. So one thing that I realized that I learned going into college is that I had a really surprisingly like strong work ethic. And I was thinking back to what I used to do in high school. So, you know, with the traditional learning environment, and I definitely had like a few classes, whether it be in middle school or like some in high school, that implemented the more traditional like sit down, lecture, and take notes. But what I realized was that in the classes where I actually got to collaborate with different people, or I got to be responsible for my own notes and kind of gain a basic understanding of my own like learning material, and then I would go to class and ask the teacher questions, I kind of developed a self-discipline when it came to taking notes and really taking advantage of the resources that my university has available to me. So for instance, one of my history classes, I would kind of go outside of class and I would ask some of my friends if we wanted to make study groups and if we wanted to do kind of like independent study and do some research, so we'd really have a good understanding of the concepts that we learned in class. And so I think that helped me to become not only more self-disciplined when it came to my studies, but it also made me a little more courageous when it came to approaching people that I didn't know and kind of asking them for help and if we wanted to collaborate on different studies. So that was one thing. And the next thing I kind of wanted to touch on was also the creativity component, because I currently work for the Daily Texan. So that at UT is our student news organization. And one thing that I realized was we would work on videos as a team. And so I'm currently a video editor, so I work mainly with like computers. But one thing that I found was really cool was that everyone has a very specific role. So one person's in charge of writing the script and one person's in charge of producing. So gaining interviews on Zoom or like going out and filming video in their communities. And I'm in charge of kind of compiling everything. And we have a bunch of like group chats and like Google Docs where we're constantly collaborating with each other. And a part of me was like, wow, this is like exactly what I used to do in high school. So we would each have our specific roles for our group project, and we would each kind of communicate, whether that be via text or like email or whatnot. And we would all put our hard work and individual creativity into a final project. And so I think I really wanted to speak to that, because as someone who's really interested in going into whether it be like journalism or videography or just writing in general, it really shows how E2L can really apply to your more like career or extracurricular activities too, because I am really interested in doing like that kind of work in the future. And I think E2L really helped me with that.
Thank you so much for sharing, Jackie. It's amazing to just see the parallels between what you were doing in high school to exactly what you're doing right now, and with the daily text, and obviously also in your classes. So thank you for sharing that experience, and for us to be able to see that parallel and how those skills transferred over. Marco, do you want to go ahead and add to that and your experience?
Sure. One of the things that two of the things that I really felt like I learned from the E2a Learning Model was primarily communication. I've always been one to really talk to a lot of people during class, even even when I wasn't supposed to. But I'd be talking to my friends a lot, and that would be very easy for me to to communicate with my friends about material that we learned during class. But I never really kind of got in a traditional classroom setting. I never really got out of my bubble and talked to other classmates. And so E2L really pushed me to do that, because we'd get paired up in groups, and as it was stated earlier, we would have to communicate with our group and with the teacher. So it helped me, kind of get a wider range on my communication. If maybe I was stuck with something, or if a peer of mine was stuck, we'd really communicate. And so that really helped me communicate in the outside world. I really took note of that in my first semester of college, because I had to communicate to succeed in my classroom. I had to make peer groups, like Jackie said. So, I couldn't just sit there and wait for somebody to approach me. I had to go out there and do that myself. And something else was also, kind of like self-teaching. Like Darshini said, that you would ask a teacher for help and they wouldn't give you the answer. Instead, they'd maybe give you, they'd answer it in a question, but in a way that, it would tailor to you finding the answer. So I'd be emailing professors like, hey, maybe, how can you help me with this? And they wouldn't give me a straight answer, but they would help me help myself, how I can look at the subject differently, or what else I can look into. That way I can find the answer for myself. So I felt like I was very prepared. The self-teaching and the communication, I feel like E2L really helped me out with that.
Thank you so much for sharing, Marco. And I'm glad that you were able to, have a positive experience and be prepared when you did need to reach out for, office hours and ask those questions. And you knew that, you were able to self-guide and do the research to get where you needed to go. So thank you for sharing. Would anyone else like to share about their experience and how, and the skills they developed in and how they transferred over, and maybe give an example like Jackie and Marco shared?
Sure. So at Brown, we can make our own majors, and so that's why I'm majoring in food and identity. But obviously, there's a 20-long-page proposal that we have to write and kind of figure out how to do. And so in doing Engage to Learn, the way it's set up is really the way that the thought process to kind of go through that whole proposal process is as well. It's definitely what is the main problem you want to focus on? And then questions you need to ask yourself is, how am I going to learn this? What are the things I need to know? What do I not need to know because I already have that prior knowledge? And really how you're going to set out the foundation for your educational career. And as Jackie and Marco were talking, in wanting to become a practicing physician, that's also a lot of how life really works in general, especially in medicine. It's a patient comes in with a problem and they don't give you all the answers. They tell you things that's going wrong with them, and then you have to go and figure out what's going to continue happening and what you're going to do to solve that problem and have an end goal in mind. And so I really think that Engage to Learn is applicable not only to school and college, but to the greater life as well, in whatever profession you decide to go into.
Hey, Ashley, somebody put a question in the chat for the students too. I just wanted to tell you, because I don't know if you saw that. Okay.
Yeah.
Awesome.
We'll get to that one. I do want to say thank you for Erin for sharing that example and the analogy there. I love how, what you're doing in high school in this learning environment, in this learning model is very applicable to what might be happening in a hospital right now with a doctor interviewing a patient. And so it's just so true. And I'm just, once again, I'm just so, happy and that you all were able to take those skills that you didn't even know you were necessarily developing in the moment and really just apply them now. It just, I'm so proud of you all and the experiences that you've had and how you've taken it and just run with it. So we do have a question from the audience. So the question is, was there a tool or a resource within or outside of the E2a Learning Model that you used that had the most impact on your learning? And so if you're thinking about tools and resources, we could be thinking about like the to-do list or your standards aligned rubric or your team learning plan. So if any of y'all would like to speak to that, something that you used while you were in your units and going through the steps in the model and how that had an impact on your learning.
Can I bring in like an app if that would be helpful?
Absolutely.
Oh, okay. So one app that I used a lot in my classes and extracurricular activities was called Slack. And so it's kind of like a professional like workspace for people who in like a work setting are trying to like communicate with one another and share ideas. So I had this one class that was called Critical Reading and Persuasive Writing. And so we had to share our ideas about certain topics, whether it be things that were going on in news media or people we were studying in history. And so with Slack, we were kind of able to write our posts and our thoughts and share them onto like a workspace, and then different people would be able to respond to them. And so what's really cool about this is that you can have one big like Slack channel is what it's called, where everyone and the professor can like incorporate their ideas, and then you can have separate smaller group chats where you can interact with maybe just one person that you're working on a group project with or a few other people. And so I also use this for the Daily Texan whenever we're working on videos. So we have one huge group Slack for every videographer and our editors too. And then for each of our different projects, so one video might be on student government, or one might be on the changes that are happening as we're transitioning into online learning. And so one video might be on that. And so each video has its specific channel with the people that are working in there. And so I just think it's a really good way to keep organized all of your like professional interactions with people, and it's called Slack.
Thank you for sharing that, Jackie. And if you wouldn't mind putting that in the chat, I feel like that's something that, can be very useful as we're moving into the potential like remote work environments. And then Shannon, did you want to add something on there?
No, that's specifically to Jackie. I should have sent that to her privately.
Oh, no, that's fine. And then I think we are just about out of time. So I just want to wrap up really quickly before we move into the closing and say thank you once again to our panelists for providing your insight and your thoughts and just your experience with the E2a Learning Model and how it's really either prepared and or developed you in these skills for where you're at now. So thank you again for joining us, for taking the time to join us. And everyone else, we are recording this session. So if you know someone that wasn't able to be here, we will be putting this together to share out. And then we're gonna jump on back to the closing so that Shannon can close us out with some inspiration to leave us, for the day and moving forward. Shannon, Chris, did you want to add anything before we go?
I just want to say thanks to the students. Thank you so much for being on here, and so proud to see, the great things that you're accomplishing in life, the impact you're having on the world. It's amazing. So really thank you for spending some time with us. And Ashley, way to go, right? Because, you're connected to all of them as well. So thank you so much for spending time with us today. It's very inspirational, I know, to everybody to hear.
It's just great hearing y'all, knowing that, our future is in y'all's hands and the amazing things that you're doing. And so it just makes me, feel so just like positive and just grateful that you are the ones that are leading our future, and that this could be a possibility for every student, that was in your shoes at one point. So thank you so much. If anyone has additional questions, I'll stay on for a minute or two, and then we're going to move on over to the closing. Students, thank you. Enjoy the rest of your day.